Welcome to Ethics Today, a program dedicated to the art of listening, to taking a step back, listening to people who can give us an informed perspective on some of the important things going on in our world at this time so that we might act in a more ethically responsible manner. Today's guest is Dr. Andre Johnson, Associate Professor of Rhetoric and Media Studies at the University of Memphis. He is co-author of a book titled The Struggle Over Black Lives Matter and All Lives Matter. In addition, Dr. Johnson serves as senior pastor of the Gifts of Life Ministries, an inner-city church built upon the servant leadership philosophy in Memphis, Tennessee. So Dr. Johnson, thank you so much for taking time to visit with me today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It is indeed an honor and a privilege.
I've really been enjoying the Bible study sessions that you had been doing over the past several weeks as part of your ministry, and you've been holding these on Facebook Live. And then last week, of course, you really talked about the protests, and I think you're going to be doing that again tonight.
Yes.
Could you just share with me and with the listeners on this podcast what you're seeing when you look at what's going on in Memphis, in Minneapolis, in Washington, Atlanta, all over the country? What are you seeing when you observe these protests?
Well, again, thank you for the invitation, and thank you for this dialogue. I think it's needed from people who genuinely want to learn and want to hear, to listen to one another. So I am supportive of all of those efforts. So what do I see? I see pain. I see frustration. I see anger. I see hands up in the air, not knowing what else to do. Because this is not the first time. This is not like it would within the month. Think about this. This is what, when people ask me, what do you mean by frustration? So think about within a 30-day period, a month, we saw Ahmaud Arbery jogging and got shot by vigilantes. I mean, this is what we saw, right? We didn't see, but we heard about police breaking into Breonna Taylor's home and shooting her dead 8 times. And we know that it happened because we have reports and we have the body, and somehow her boyfriend, who was arrested because he shot at the police, not knowing, he thought somebody was breaking into the house, he's released. So we know that happened because you just don't release a person unless you know that you did something wrong. So we know that happened. We also saw in Central Park a white woman, a white woman threatening an African-American man by saying, I am going to call the police, and then I'm going to say that an African-American man is harassing me or intimidating me, or, she knew exactly what she was doing. And then on Memorial Day, Lord have mercy, we saw Derek Chauvin, and I like to say the names. I'm not going to be passive here, Rick. I'm going to try to be as direct as possible. Derek Chauvin with his knee on the neck of George Floyd for almost 9 minutes. And here's the part where I don't think a lot of people really understand. That was bad enough. Okay, that's bad enough. That should be fireable. You should be convicted behind that. We get that. But Rick, the look on his face, the way that he proudly now stayed on the neck of Brother Floyd. And he looked around, hands on his hip, hands in pockets, just like this is normal. you cannot dismiss the act from the expression on his face. And I said, I went to social media and I was wrestling with that because I couldn't get that picture out of my face. And I just said, this is what pure evil looks like. This is the example right here. And let us not forget, there are cameras rolling. There are people telling him, please, sir, let him up. He can't breathe. He's calling for mama. He's hurting. You got him down. He's handcuffed. The other two officers, we discovered later, were pressing down on his back. So you got a knee and you got officers holding you down. And people are asking you in a nonviolent way, because I know we're going to get to that, in a nonviolent way, please, sir, please, let him up. Let him up. That's in a month. And the problem I really have with all of this, and every time something like this happens, because we know this is not going to be the last time, we will have something else, I'm sorry to say. But because we never learn our lessons. What's frustrating to me is that after seeing all of that, that many folks still cannot empathize enough to at least say, I understand. I got it. I don't totally understand, but at least I see your point. You know how you just like, yeah, I may not, yeah, but yeah. You can't even get that. And that's what I see. I see pain. I see frustration. I see anger. I see don't know what to do next. I see none of the strategies working. And yet and still, look at what it took. Look at what it took, Rick, to get folk to act. The DA was not going to act. It took protest. It took just bringing attention to this situation. And it took a video. God, we would not even be here. You would not be interviewing me. I'm sorry to say, if it was not for that terrible, tragic video.
Yeah.
If somebody would have told you that happened, many folk would have said, that just, no, not the police. No, they would never do. Now, I know police done some shady stuff, but they would never put their knee on the neck of a person for almost 9 minutes and choke them out. I refuse to believe that if it was not for the video.
Yeah, we would not have this kind of public reaction without that video.
Right.
And my question is, like, is racism actually getting worse, or are we just seeing more evidence of what's always been going on because everybody's got cell phones now and we've got social media to get it out immediately. And so so we don't have a good sense of actually whether there's progress or not, and this is something I have to ask you, because I just don't have a good sense of where society is going with these issues.
Well, within policing in America, what if we really would have turned the corner back in 1990, let's say 2, Rodney King?
Yeah.
So even if you don't want to go in history, you just want to, do the trajectory of history, you can start in 1992. And I can ask the same question. Has race relations gotten any better? And, for a lot of people, no. And the reason, but there is a inherent fallacy even in the question. And here's what I'm talking about. The inherent fallacy is the myth of progress, the historical embedded myth of progress, that each and every year we're just getting better and better and better and better and better. And Are we? You know, um, hmm. I, I just saw a guy get, you know, choked out with a knee on Memorial Day. I don't know if we're getting better or not. I don't know. And yes, the other part of that is this is the same stuff that many Black folk probably have told you privately or publicly, and other white people privately or publicly. And this is without cameras. People have been telling you this. People have been telling us this over and over and over and over again. And it's been dismissed. It's just been like, okay, they're irrational, they're emotional, they got an axe to grind, it's political, it's any of those things but truth. So Black truth doesn't matter. That's something I want to talk about a little bit later too. But to say that it's getting better is just to deny the fact that we have never addressed any of the issues at its foundational roots, which is, of course, white supremacy and all that it brings to bear upon this country.
So
yes, we got more cameras. We see more. We see more, and yet and still we still don't want to address, even when our lying eyes, as my parents and used to say, even with our lying eyes, we still don't want to address the issue.
However, I want to challenge you so you can correct me, right? Because this is how dialogue works, and I'm fully prepared to admit I might, I've got a narrow perspective. One of the things is,
go ahead, please.
Right. So I already live in kind of a bubble in society with with my friends and colleagues and so forth that I have. But it seems to me, especially over the past 5 years, that we are paying much more attention to identities in general, race and gender, and race and gender in particular. But just about any group that I'm a member of, like a service organization or a committee and so forth, one of the first questions that get asked is, what is the composition of this group? Now, prior to 5 years ago, that wasn't the first question that would get asked, and now it is, right?
Okay.
And we've had tremendous discussions both in the nation and many communities about white privilege, because this has been a term that was just became prominent a couple of years ago, and now it's part of popular discourse and people are talking about it. And I also find young people, and especially young people of color, willing to challenge me publicly about my use of words and so forth, my assumptions, in a way which just was never done before, which I know that some people my generation find disrespectful. But it's also like there's a kind of confidence that's admirable here too, in an attention to social justice. And so all these things seem to me to be saying, like, we're actually finally, just in the last few years, actually starting to make some significant changes in the way we look at and talk about race. At the same time, we are responding more violently towards evidence of racism.
Oh, yeah. So, okay. So that you kind of like, you really answered your own question, but let me just put it this way. If what you just said, if that's the example of progress that you are talking about, I will concede that point. However, that same progress did not stop Derek Chauvin from choking out George Floyd. That progress did not stop the country from electing in 2016 a person who trafficked, and this is a nice way of saying it, who trafficked in white racism and racist rhetoric. That same type of progress did not stop Breonna Taylor and others from being shot and killed. The police have that same type of training. They have diversity training, they have sensitivity training, implicit bias training, and none of that is stopped. My argument And this, I'm glad you brought this up because this is something I've been kind of working on ever since we finished the book back in 2018 on Black Lives Matter, All Lives Matter. That I can make an argument, Rick, that the more we do this and to try to be helpful, the more what King called, MLK called, the white backlash kicks in.
Yeah.
That folk are resenting the fact that they have to, look around and say, oh, we need to diversify our table a little bit. I like the table the way it is. Why I have to do that? You're infringing on my rights. You're in Wisconsin, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Wisconsin. Did some Second Amendment enthusiasts march on the Capitol there, like they did here in Tennessee and other?
Yeah. Just
they were, and what were they saying? They were saying that my rights are being infringed. So the more that the argument can be that, the more that we are doing this and trying, because everybody says, okay, let's have a conversation. I'm going to listen. And people like yourself and others are listening, and you're saying, okay, that makes sense. Let me try to do this. Let me be trying to be more responsive in this. But there are other people that are saying, no, I'm not going to be responsive. I'm going to stand my ground. I'm going to be what I want to be, and I'm going to do what I want to do because it's my right as an American in this country. And then we get to this stalemate, and then that's why we can still have police officers and others do exactly what it is that they want to do. And not only that, and here's the other piece to all of this, is the whole notion of getting away with it. This is, you really want to know what African Americans that I have talked to and people that I know, what they're afraid of? They really are afraid that these officers may be charged, they may even have a trial, but somehow they're going to get away with it. And our lying eyes again betray us and betray all of those other people who are out there protesting and trying to bring attention not only to this killing, but to the previous ones and the ones that are going to happen in the future if we do not address this issue and address it for real and accept the consequences of our actions.
So there's this worry that they'll be prosecuted, but they might get off, right?
Because we've seen this before. This is history. It can happen.
And it seems to me this is part of a growing distrust of the institutions we've set, especially justice institutions.
Oh yeah,
right.
No question.
But institutions in general. So lack of confidence, lack of trust in the ability to meaningfully reform government, kind of enforcement institutions like law, like the police, but also legislative bodies to get meaningful access and reform in our laws, but also other institutions like education, and that I think there's a lot of arguments, right? That our public education system has really failed Black America. But we're also seeing that same kind of distrust, lack of confidence in our traditional institutions by the right, and this is what generates the protests you were referring to. Yeah. By the militia groups in nations' capitals over the stay-at-home orders. If we have both the left and the right protesting in a protest generated by a lack of confidence in the ability to reform our institutions, are we going to end up making things better or worse?
Right. That's a good question. I'll just flip it a little bit to say that when right-wing protesters protest about stay-at-home orders, what is the consequence? And here's what I'm talking about. What you protest matters. And I've always said that, and I've always talked about that. What you protest matters. On the one hand, there are people risking COVID. COVID is still here, risking COVID, going out, protesting because of Black lives and because somebody got choked, George Floyd got choked out by Derek Chauvin, and this whole thing, this whole month that I just kind of ran through and all of that. And then you got some people that want to go get a haircut or they want to go to a restaurant, and then they don't trust their government to keep them safe from COVID and all of that. That's one. Second, how I'm going to always, for this whole conversation, try to bring this back to policing in America, because that's a huge issue. How are police and how do police respond to protesters? You got one group of protesters, they get tear gassed, they get shot with rubber bullets, they get pushed back, and then you got other protesters with guns, with weapons, which you would think that if I was a police officer, I would be, in my riot gear, or I would be protecting myself. But, hey, it's their right to do this. We just here. And if you do a counter protest, typically they'll go after the counter protesters before they will go with. So when there are protests like that for people that protest and stay at home, or they say that they do not trust in these institutions, my argument back to them is that, oh, really? The institution seems to be working for you fine. The institution of policing seems to be okay with you because they're not, giving you any hassle. The institution for the government seems to be working for you. They're not asking police to arrest you or to push you aside or to step on you. Matter of fact, I think it was Michigan that actually closed their legislative assembly because of them. So you got actual government acquiescing to your right to be there with your guns. So then when young people out in the street come out with just a body, voice, and a sign, and knowing that if they have anything on their person that look like a weapon, they will be shot on the spot. And it would be justified because they had a weapon. Can they invoke Second Amendment rights? In other words, how would we like to see the folk that has been in Minneapolis, New York, Memphis, Los Angeles, Chicago, what if all those people just said, we're going to invoke our Second Amendment rights and carry guns? That would not be a pretty sight. And so they can't do that, though. They know they can't do that. They barely can just go out on the street anyway. So when you talk about the two different protests, no, I'm looking at the response, and the government overwhelmingly responds differently. So to you, Mr. Protester Second Amendment, and Mrs. Protester Second Amendment, and your guns, and you want to go get a haircut, the government is acquiescing to you. Matter of fact, the government has opened. You reopen, go out. No need to protest anymore. You won, go, have fun.
Okay, so you're saying, and I understand that, right? You're saying that we've got these different standards, and the police respond very differently. And you've got so a group of white protesters that have weapons, they're occupying state capitals and so forth, and police just stand back and let them do it.
Right.
Okay? But here's the response I'm seeing on social media by the people who defend, those kinds of protests. They're saying, okay, well, yeah, they're exhibiting their Second Amendment rights. They're showing the weapons, but
Uh-huh.
they actually aren't causing any damage.
Mm-hmm.
We watched the protests,
Mm-hmm.
right, in response to the
Right.
murder of George Floyd. What we're seeing is it's not that people are brandishing weapons, but they're actually doing damage. They're destroying buildings and they're setting them on fire. And so that's why there's a different police response, not whether, because maybe they don't have the symbolism of violence or
Right.
weapons, but they're actually causing destruction.
Right. So my response to that, because we've had this conversation before too, is that, well, I could say much, much more, but I'll just leave it at here. That yes, that may be happening, but even the peaceful protesters get caught up in all of that. So the response is already militant before the first building is destroyed, or there's destruction on any building, that they are already in position. And what we have been arguing is that when the police show up for certain protests, they are already ready to not de-escalate, but to escalate. I was just reading before coming on the podcast. I was just reading a study that has shown for 50 years, a 50-year study. They've gone back and look at all of the uprisings in America. Every last uprising that you just name anyone started. First of all, the uprising started because of police violence, typically to a Black person. Number two, even when they show up, the police escalate instead of de-escalate. How would it look then if police escalated the Second Amendment protesters? What if police start pushing on them? Start, beating the batons, beating the shields with the batons. Move, 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 move. What if?
Well, I would guess, I think we've seen some of that in places like Waco and Ruby Ridge, right?
So there you, and then all of a sudden, right? But even in this, though, there are some instances where the those protesters have pushed back on police officers, and there is no response, which leads me to believe that there is no training issue. There's only a character issue, as I wrote on my blog just the other day. The character of the individual. Who do I respond to? And maybe it's because of the Ruby Ridges and all of that, that maybe they are saying, if we push back on these folk, they might shoot back. But we know that many of these folk in this crowd would not shoot back. And let me just add this. Police have no problem with arresting Black and brown bodies. They are going to arrest. Every morning you wake up, there were over 250 arrests. There were 300 arrests. There were 350 arrests. So this whole notion of Black people not, being arrested or not being held account, that is a myth. That is just go to any prison, jail, any facility in America. You will see that that's not a problem. The problem is the way that policing has been done. And when policing, those few occasions, Rick, where de-escalation happens, protests, fan out. They'll just shout. They'll do all they want to do. Police just stand there. Somebody on the bullhorn says, last words, and everybody goes home. And then it's amazing that it was a peaceful protest. The police did their jobs. That's what they're supposed to do. They don't supposed to escalate. Yeah. Police, I have my own stories, and I won't just share them here, but please, I'll just say this. Please believe Black people when they say that police escalate and say things while they are out there trying to get a rise out of the people. They really do. And yes, not everybody that's out there in the streets have been through nonviolent direct action training and know how to handle things nonviolently. But, you know, I do draw a line when we talk about violence on buildings versus violence to people. And I don't use violence. I use destruction. You know, yeah, you can talk about destruction of property, but violence can happen to human beings. And you typically, usually, before any of this happens, there is a violent act upon a body by a police officer that was sworn to protect and serve.
So, thank you for bringing this right back to policing. And this is, and it seems to me we've seen examples of, like in Flint, Michigan, where the police chief marches with the protesters, right?
Right.
And there seems to be, like in some communities, I think, well, my own community of La Crosse, we made an investment a number of years ago in neighborhood resource officers, so we get officers in the communities, especially the most racially diverse communities, to develop relationships. And
right.
then we had our mayor willing to sit down and meet with and listen to the organizers of the protests here that very first night, right at the time. The mayor's wife was marching with the protesters and so forth. All of this makes a difference, de-escalating things. And yet, I'm also hearing that there's, like, police chiefs and even mayors have limited ability to change the culture and to really make the changes that you want to see happen. But I'm hearing all kinds of different explanations. Part of it is the strength of the unions, that the unions have incredible power at kind of maintaining culture.
Right.
I've heard this especially as a criticism of the Minneapolis Police
Oh
Department.
yeah, most definitely.
Right. And then the other thing is the qualified immunity laws protecting police officers from prosecution. So are there specific things that you, and I would say other community leaders who are addressing these injustices, are there specific things that you are asking for?
Yes, most definitely. Number one, hashtag defund the police. What we mean by that? Most of your city, if we would just take a look at the city budgets around the country, just especially in major metropolitan areas, a large chunk of the budget, depending on where you are, close to 50% almost, go to policing efforts. Small chunk of that money goes to, like, community policing, or you hear these stories about these gyms in certain neighborhoods where the police officers come and hang out with the, that's very, very small, if any. Most of it is just weaponry, tanks and military style weapons. And so we're talking about defund the police, but how did you do that? And this is where really the rubber meets the road, and this is where the people have to come in. If I am a candidate for mayor, and if I run on a platform saying that this is a problem, here's what I'm going to do, or if I run as a city council person, who, by the way, endorse these police union contracts. These police union contracts just do not fall out of the sky. Somebody has to approve them and show city elected officials. So if I'm running, and I'm saying I'm talking about reforming the police department, the people have to look at that as an important issue and vote for me so I can begin to do that. The problem is police still and this is what my research shows, police still get a huge benefit of the doubt. That's why it's hard to convict them. The juries that are made up of the people in that community can look at a video and say, that's terrible, that's bad, but then they get into a courtroom and then they begin to hear, well, maybe he was afraid. Maybe he did fear for his life. Oh, wait, that usually works for white officers, not 100% of the time, but 98.9% of the time. But because in the same Minneapolis area, Muhammad Noor was convicted 12 years for shooting not a black person, but a white woman who was on vacation. And he's used the same trope. I fear for my life. Didn't work for him. And guess what? You didn't have to have a whole lot of protests centered around that. Why? Because the DA immediately charged. Immediately went to court. So we even get race, there's even a tinge of racism in who gets charged and why and how. So these police unions, the police are powerful only because they have people in elected positions to sign off on everything that they want for policing. So one of the things that we're trying to do is, hey, when's the next negotiation for the union contract for your police officers? We want to be there. We want to show up. We want people who have been affected directly by bad policing to show up. And then let's start putting stuff in that contract, like you were saying, the whole immunity thing. Right now in many districts across the country, police officers have a 48 to 72 hour cooling off period where they don't have to talk to anybody but their union reps. Lawyers, the DA, no one. And we all know what those 3 days are for, 2 or 3 days are for. It's to construct the story, the narrative, and to come back out into the public. And we ought to give some protection to the, quote, good cops who may want to come forward. Here's another myth, the whole myth of the good cop. Individually, great people that are police officers. But within the system, they are stifled. Why? Because they know that if they come forward, they may not get the protection that they need. Their job may be in jeopardy. And heaven forbid that they're on a call and not get the backup that they need. So they don't come forward. Which leads me to believe, by the way, when we talk about there are more good cops than bad cops, I don't know. If there were more good cops than bad cops, then good cops would not be afraid to come forward when bad cops do, wrongful actions. The reason why they don't come forward because they know there are more maybe bad cops or cops that won't support them by coming forward. So yeah, those are some of the things that we're doing. It's all about electing the people that will at least fight for your issue. The problem is police get a huge benefit of the doubt. And especially in communities that policing is going well. Or, I see the police as my friend. They protect me. They protect my business. Why would I want to defund the police? And so it's going to be very, very hard. It's going to be, after all of these protests, after all the people, when we start talking about changing up the narrative a little bit and maybe having some tougher sanctions, if you will, I think everybody's going to go back to their corners and just say, in the private voting booth, I'm going to vote for the person that's going to be more law and order than reform. And that's where we are.
Yeah, and I'm worried about that kind of response, the more stress on the law and order and the increasing militarization of the police. And one of the reasons is I was looking last year at the statistics on police suicide, which
Yeah.
it's really alarming, the rate at which that has been going up over the last 10 years.
More money needs to be spent as well. Part of the platform is mental health for police officers as well too. And as a pastor, I am discerning part of that is just the cognitive dissonance that you have to have a lot of times when you police. It's just, especially if you're an African American police officer,
Yeah.
you just really, or if you're the chief and you're African, this is my pastor side coming out, right? I'm like, I get it. You really have to wrestle with what it is that you are supporting and what you're doing. Now, that's as far as I go with it, because a lot of people have just said, forget it. I'm just going to, like the cops in Atlanta. People come back to me. I've had this happen where the cops just dragged and tasered the young couple and just, messed up the car and everything. Well, now 6 officers have been, charged. A couple of officers have been fired. But everybody was like, oh, these were Black officers. I'm like, it's systemic. It doesn't matter. It's systemic. You can buy in to bad policing and you can just go out and you can do it. And that what makes it, kind of tough and kind of hard. So even when you try to diversify the police, if police of color are doing the same things that white police officers are doing, or they are doing the same thing that the embedded culture is doing, participating in don't snitch campaigns and stuff like that. There's no reform there just because you have a Black face with the uniform on. It is systemic. It is, as Walter Wink, the great theologian, would say, it is a spirit. It is the spirit of the institution itself that then takes over even the individuals. And then you get caught up and you like, oh my God, I got caught up in this. What is going on with me? So yes, mental health is huge. And we would rather spend money on that than tanks and, rubber bullets, missiles, and a whole other things that the police officer have.
So how will you know when we've made progress? And this is one, so here I'm looking at it. I mean, I'm simply because I'm white, I can be angry about this. I can be committed to say, okay, we're going to get on board with some reforms and do some things. But I'm not going to have the same visceral reaction, right? But I do want to know, like, how I can participate, how I can get on board with really helping to address these systematic racial issues and injustices, right? But I also want to know, like, what are the benchmarks? How do I know that we've made progress? Because one thing I know for sure, we're not going to quit seeing videos like the one we saw with George Floyd. I mean, maybe not a white police officer on a Black man's neck for 8 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
But we're going to, because everybody has cell phones, because police officers are going to have bad judgment, things are going to be happening. No matter what we do, there are going to be at least occasional cases. So things could be getting much better, and yet we still see evidences of terrible injustice. How do we know that we're actually making progress?
Right. Yeah. I'm gonna say something here, Rick, that may rub the audience the wrong way here, because I have really wrestled with this from time on time. Just I've been at this thing for a while now, and as a student of history, and maybe that's the issue with me. Maybe I read too much history. Maybe I know, as a student of rhetoric and as a scholar of rhetoric, I know some of these arguments have been made in the past. I can just go as far back as the founding of the country, especially in the 19th century, where people are making arguments about police brutality, about, this same thing over and over again. Here's what I'm trying to get people to understand. to just ask this question. I'm not saying it's going to happen. How about that? I'm going to be a little bit hopeful. What if there is not any progress that is tangible or seen in such a way that we can just celebrate we arrived? What if the best that we can hope for is to live in the tension that racism affords us? What if we say and admit, I guess that's the word I'm looking for. What if we admit that this country was founded at its core, founded on, even, forget the words for a moment, all men at that time were created equal. Founded on the backs of enslaved humans and the removal of Native Americans from their homeland. And accept it. Just say that, yes, that is so baked into our psyche that we cannot even escape that. And the best that we can do is to live in the tension and to have these conversations that we're having for white people to begin to do work with other white people. My thing is, what if we just accept the fact that we may have to live in the tension, that we are all going to be uncomfortable, that there are spaces and places where we may not feel the best, but yet the small victories, such as something as simple as an acknowledgement of what I just talked about, a eureka moment that somebody who had been thinking one way for so long, all of a sudden said, you know, I'm changing my position. Now, would that change the overarching narrative? Of course not. But at least it is those small, you're talking about benchmark, those are some small indicators.
Yeah.
But as far as the large, like, you know, I do not foresee police officers laying down their weapons and just renouncing, you know, their whole departments renouncing their violence upon the American citizens and American people. I just don't see that happening. But I would like to think that I would see one or maybe two police officers say something to the effect, you know, this job is taking the life out of me, that I need to do something else. I can't do this anymore. Or I need to really begin to talk to my fellow police officers about what this means to me and how does it mean to, so yes, smaller benchmarks. But as far as, you know, getting rid of this, I just don't see it. History is on my side. I mean, we have had these type of conversations. We have had these type, you know, more people are coming. And I would like to hope that some of my teaching and there's so much out there on race and racism and on policing. And I mean, people have spent years, decades researching this stuff. It is out. Everybody knows it. Police know it. They get it in the police academy. They bring in folk. They do all of this, and it's just rejected. It is just like pushed to the side. It's not education. I'm sorry, it is just not education. Education, if that was the case, we would have been better, way much better by now. It is out there. It is the will. It is the character. It is the heart. You know, we talk about a spiritual revival that needs to take place. You know, exorcising of some demons. That's now, you know, because anything other than that, I mean, I don't know. It just, the benchmarks are But just celebrate the victories, celebrate the small benchmarks, celebrate the fact that, you know, what you mentioned earlier, Rick, if you're in a board meeting or if you're in a group or organization and somebody make mention, hey, we need more diversity. You're right. I mean, 10 years ago, maybe 15 years ago, that person probably wouldn't have said that. You know, celebrate that. But also know that there are people literally, not figuratively, literally dying because systemic racism is killing and choking the life out of them each and every day. Please understand that. Please know that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you so much. We went well beyond the time I had planned, although I also expected that. So
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for the work that you're doing also. I mean, this is one of the great things about this kind of new electronic media that we,
Yeah.
I know there's all this evidence that it's really polarizing, you know, Twitter and Facebook, the other social media and so forth, they use these algorithms that tend to make us even more polarized. And yet they also give us the opportunity so that I can sit in on a Bible study that you are doing with your congregation in Memphis. And it is wonderful for me. I find myself just lifted up by that experience. So thank you for persisting in that kind of work. And thank you for taking the time to just talk to me and listen to my questions.
Thank you. Thank you. And you mentioned our work. As you mentioned earlier, I am the pastor of Gifts of Life Ministries, and we do have within our ministry, which we call our social justice and public advocacy ministry. And if you would like to be involved in the movement, you don't see yourself as a protester, you don't see yourself making a sign and marching or being on the street corner, you don't see yourself doing it, but you are sympathetic to the needs and you want to be part of the movement, you can make a donation to our social justice ministry fund to help us reach out to protesters, help us to educate, to help us to do these things that we really need to do. We are still trying to do the thing. We're still trying to do the ministry. We're still trying to do the things that we need to do because we do want to celebrate in those small victories. And we have seen some here in Memphis, Tennessee. So we just want to make a little bit more. So if you want to make a donation to Gifts of Life Ministries, you can do that as well.
Well, thank you so much. And I will put a link on the description for this podcast. I'll put a link right in there so people can know where to go. And so.
All right.
All right.
Well, thank you, Rick.
Thank you. And I hope I can take 10.
And anytime, if you if we want to do this again, I'd love to do it again as well.
I tell you what, one thing we did not get to is talking about Martin Luther King. And I wanted to bring that up, but I thought, well, that's going to take another half hour or hour. So maybe at some point we talk about that, because I know that you're a scholar of King's, and there's a lot of concern about how he's both appropriated and misappropriated.
Yes. Let's do that.
All right.
Take care.
Take care. Bye.